Good morning. Ayin Beis. We're reviewing middle of Maamar 5, the fifth Maamar, which is the Shlach Maamar. So let me just put it into context, and then I'll go more specifically because you asked me to go deeper into to explain that Pedic. What Pedic was it? Pedic Yutes. It's a complicated Pedic, but I think it'll also help a little overview about it. We're talking about Esesphiras Agnuzis. It's not common that Chassidus talks about the Esesphiras Agnuzis, especially with such arichas, because you really, according to Chabad, Chassidus Chabad, Esesphiras Agnuzis is before the Tzimtzum. According to the Arizal, Poshta Taich, if you look up in Kabbalah, Esesphiras Agnuzis is usually Esesphiras Agnuzis of Atik, or of Akudim even, or Ak, the highest. But it's all after the Tzimtzum, because it's the contrast to Esesphiras Agluyas. Esesphiras Agluyas is Atzilus. That's clear, because that's where it's a functional Elam, a functional domain. Atzilus, as we talked at length about Atzilus, is the perfect divine world. If you were to see perfection, it's Atzilus. Eris and Kalim, Iyu v'chayu echad, Iyu v'gamu echad, everything we learn about Atzilus. Higher than Atzilus is already the Esesphiras are Fi'erach Gnuzis. That's what it means. It's concealed. It's like the equivalent of Keiches Gluyim and Keiches Nalam. So Keiches Gluyim is a functioning human being. We have Keiches Gluyim, but the Keiches Gluyim originate from Keiches Nalam that are Nalam Benefesh. As you know, Nalamim is rooted in Keiches Atzmim, or Keiches Hiyulim, and then Keiches Atzmim. And Keiches Atzmim, Nefesh Nese Keiches, and etc. So this is the dugma of Keiches and Nefesh, is the dugma, the operative example Chassidus always brings, to make things a little easier, because as no one's ever seen 10 spheres. But Keiches, you can see Psarech Zalakah, so you can see Be'eni Basar, you see it functioning by you. The Psarech Zalakah, so the Keiches and Nefesh are always the mashal for spheres. I'm saying it also as a cloud because it makes it easier. When you want to understand spheres, you can go look it up in Maamar, but you could also look at the mashal and see how does it work by the Keiches. The Keiches, as the Alter Rebbe establishes in the beginning of Tanya, Nishtalshlu Mehen. Right? That's what he says. Esa Keiches HaNefesh, Nishtalshlu from the Esa spheres. So that's how you saw it in general. So in context of what we're talking about, so Esa spheres Agluyas is, Atzilus is equivalent to Keiches Gluyim, and Esesphiras Agnuzis is equivalent to Keiches Nalamim. It could be even higher than Nalamim, but just for the record, let's call it Nalam. Chabad Chassidus, the Alter Rebbe, and especially the Mittler Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, Barichas, take Esesphiras Agnuzis, that the real root of Esesphiras Agnuzis is before the Tzimtzum. That's a major chiddush, because no one talks before the Tzimtzum. You're going to look in Sifrei Kabbalah, you're not going to have much discussion lifnei Tzimtzum. Everything begins after the Tzimtzum. Look at Eitz Chaim. He says, it filled everything, the loy hayamokim, the elamis, and then Tzimtzum Atzmei, the whole thing of Tzimtzum, the Kav, and the rest of Eitz Chaim, of that is all about after Tzimtzum. So that alone is a chiddush. So what does it teach us? And I said this already, but I'm just repeating it because I think it will help understand the whole next few Maamarim especially. What it means is that the sherish of the Keiches HaNefesh, Nos, right now, you're Eser Keiches HaNefesh, Nefesh Alekis, from Chochmah through Malchus, Chabad Chagas Nehim, is Nishtal Shalom Hem from Keiches, from the Spheres of Atzilus. How high do the Spheres of Atzilus reach? So according to, if you look just in Kabbalah, you could say, okay, Keser, Atik, Arich, Atik, Akudim, Ak, but before the Tzimtzum is Ein Sof of Malakol HaMetzias, everything's Pshitas. Says Chassidus, no. That Bedakas the Dakas, not even the word Dakas is not really the right word. That in conceptually, the Eibush, even lifnei Tzimtzum, he's already envisioning what the whole Sheder Shtalshlus, including the Esesphiras. The mashal I gave was an artist, before he creates the art, which would be, creating the art is Tzimtzum already, and after the Tzimtzum, he envisions what kind of art he's going to create. Which of course is going to get into the whole discussion, Yisrael, all of Machshava. Which Machshava? So Chassidus goes all the way to Machshava Lifnei Tzimtzum. Now it always has to be qualified with a big Kavyachal, because then Lifnei Tzimtzum there's no dargas really. It's only the Eibush is being Megala what he's thinking, so to speak. But that's a big thing. So in other words, in this level, which is completely elikus, that there's no nesinus mokum ne'elamus. That's what that Izal says. That's why there's a tzimtzum. Even there is something that we can talk about at least, with all the qualifications. It's not Sfiras, that's what he's discussing. So what is this Esses Sfiras Agnuzis? You're talking Lifnei at Tzimtzum. It's Pshittus, like I said, clearly says, Gnuzis v'nalamas be'edin sof ha'inoshen klum michodim b'ay, einam b'chinas mitzias la'atzman. So all that, and yet there's still something. So this is the dilemma here. So what we're discussing here is very high levels. I don't know if any of you looked up the letter of the Rebbe. I would definitely advise you look it up, the Tavshin test that I mentioned the other day. Did you look it up? Check out the letter, because the Rebbe addresses this very directly. He doesn't talk about Sfiras Agnuzis per se, but he talks about how could there be Dargas Lifnei Tzimtzum. So that's what we're in the middle of now. How do you understand, from the Eibishter's perspective, what I call the artist, the Beta, and the Eir? Of course, it's Eir Ein Sof, because like we learned from the Maamar from the Alter Rebbe in Perek Yud Zayin, he quoted the Maamar for Hanocha for Pinchas Reizes. Was it Zayin? I'm sorry, Zayin, or I thought it was Perek Yud Zayin. No? Yeah. Perek Yud Zayin. He says, also very Yuseidizdik, from the Maamar Shishim Hema Melachis, Ksaviyat Harap, that the whole thing of Sfira is not Shaykh, not Shmusa Mahusay, only B'chinas Eid Ein Sof. That's the place in the Alter Rebbe that he says, first time that there's Sfiras in Eid Ein Sof, not Shmus for sure not, but in Eid Ein Sof, yes. And in Eid Ein Sof itself, there's higher levels of Sfiras Ein Ketz. That would be in the marshal that I gave, like an artist envisioning the Eibishter could create any type of existence. He could have 10, 20 Sfiras, or Bligvul Sfiras, Ein Ketz. Or the Sfiras could have been completely different. Like an artist can do all types of art. But he chose Esses Sfiras. And that's when you have the Loshen Shir Atzmei B'Keyach, all these Lashenis that we learn about, Malchus of Ein Sof. These are all those levels. That the Eibishter Shir Atzmei B'Keyach, the word Shir can be defined as envisioning, allocating resources. Shir Meshayir could be estimating, but not really fitting to say estimating here. So that's all that level. So now in this Maamar that we're reviewing now, Shlach, comes that question in Perek Yud. How do you explain this? So the Rebbe Rashab clearly brings the example with Keiches, HaNefesh. That the Keiches, the way they are before they become Keiches Gluyim, I'm talking now chapter Yud, before he gets to the Chol Ha'am, Royin HaSanishma, V'Kshemin HaSanida, he brings the mashal of Keiches, that the Keiches, before they become a Tzir Mugbal, which they are. Right now, each one of us, talk Pasha Begashmis, there's a tziyur, a structure to your keiches, to your faculties, keich ha-seichel, and keich ha-midas, and keich ha-riyah, and keich ha-shmiyah. For example, you can't see b'li gvul, you can only see that far. You can only throw a stone that far, so keich ha-tenuah. So every keich has its structure. But the keich in the nefesh is not mitzuyah yet, what he calls his pshittus mitzir. And that's why they can reside side by side, even though they're opposite keiches. Riyah and shmiyah, the keiches geluyim, sight is only in the eye. You don't see with your ears, and you don't hear with your eyes. Riyah has a specific place in location on the human body. It's called the eyes. The ayin, the klei ayin is a keli for the eir hariyah, and the klei ha'ezen is a keli for the eir hashmiyah. The same thing with your arms and legs and mind and heart and so on. How are these keiches residing in the nefesh? If you're able to imagine it, they don't have this issue of location. It's one nefesh. So it's more a state of pshittus, so you can have residing side by side different keiches, basically. So the truth, it needs hafshatadika thinking, because you have to get away from the thinking of tzir. We always think in structural terms, but it's hard for us to imagine something that's not structural. But that's what Chassidus does. It causes your mind to be more dakizdik and understand things, even though it doesn't take makam gashmi, makam ruchni. We spoke about that as well. Okay, so far so clear. Anybody wants to ask anything about what I said till now? Because I'm going to move to what we are middle of learning. Nothing? Okay, good. So now the next step in this Perek Yud, the second half, is Rebbe Rashab is giving a real time example. Like if you were to ask a question, he doesn't put it that way, but I'm phrasing it like this. This state that we're talking about, that is a dugma for Esses Sfiras Agnuzis. where the Chassidus are there, but they all are not in any form of tziyur at all. It's only conceptual, if you wish, and therefore they could all be sheikhen b'mokem echad, as he puts it. Even Havchin. Is this just theoretical? Did it ever happen in history that you actually had a gili from that place? In other words, to put it in different aces, was there ever a gili from the Esesphere Sagnuzas that we can talk about? And the answer is yeah, by Matan Torah. I should add, I realized when I reviewed it, that the truth is this Perek is based on a Maamar from the Alter Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek, with the Tzemach Tzedek's Hagos. It's an Eira Torah in Yonim, if you want to look it up. An Eira Torah in Yonim, page Shinchov Zayin Veilch. It's probably second in the one with the footnotes. So there, the Dugma Matan Torah is from the Alter Rebbe, actually, or maybe the Tzemach Tzedek. So the parentheses that we're learning, which for me it's top of page Lamed Aleph. What is it in your edition? L'cheir zeh yesem b'chinas Chassidus. Okay, but it's in Perek Test. Is actually Hagah on the Tzemach Tzedek's Maamar. So Rabbi Rashab is analyzing what the Tzemach Tzedek's dugma, because the dugma, if you look at the line before, l'chein b'matan Torah she'agil m'mayla mishtalshus b'nefesh u'in izgalos ha'keches atzmim ha'yereinas ha'nishmu v'shemenes ha'nira. That's the lashon of Eira Torah in Yonim, page Shinchov Zayin. Shinchov Ches, I should correct myself. Shinchov Ches. Huh?
Yeah. 28.
Okay. So if you look there, you realize that this whole piece is actually explaining this Maamar of the Tzemach Tzedek Alter Rebbe. Just pointing out, because it makes it a little more grounded what he's doing in this parentheses. Because the Maamar is in Tzemach Tzedek quoted here in Perek Tes is the following. We have in history once, just like it speaks in Maamorim, let's say, that Kriyas Yamsuf. Once in history, we had the Gilui of Alma Diskasi and Alma Disgali. Hofech Yam Liyabasha, only once. But for that once gives us a type of hakara in this possibility. The same thing, once in history, there was actually an example of a Gilui of Keches Atzmim, and that was by Matan Torah. So in other words, by Matan Torah, something happened, a Gilui Mulmayla Nishteder Shtalshlus, which basically, what's the word I want to use? Suspended nature. The regular structure of Keches HaNefesh, Riyah, seeing, sights, and hearing, and Shmiya, hearing sounds, was suspended because it went back to the Keches Atzmim, was like a flash. I mentioned that in other Maamorim sometimes a dugma for it. It's not exactly, but El Derech Zeh is by a simcha of a melech, by the chasna of his child. So you see a person who's b'simcha mamish without any filters, all his keches are all over the place, without hagbalas. Sometimes the Chassidus brings that example. Obviously, it's not quite like shemenes anira, but that's so seemingly this sounds fine. Everything is good. We have a dugma now, where you see we went to a place that's higher than Riyah and Shmiya in the Tzir Mugbal in Keches Gluyim, the way they are in Keches Atzmim. So there, besides Keches Atzmim, everything could be, Hafchim can come together. Just like Eish and Mayim, you say that Eish and Mayim can reside side by side, even though Begoli they can't, in the world of Geluim, but in the world of Keches Atzmim they could. So that's why you could see what you hear, and you could hear what you see. But the Rebbe Rashab is troubled by that. Because if you think about it, and this is really what the whole taken of the different analysis of what actually happened by Matan Torah, because when you think about it, this is more than just they're residing side by side, and there's no tziyur of Shmiya and Riyah. It says clearly that they actually change their functions. Till now, we learn that they reside side by side. Fine. In the Nefesh HaAdam, the Keyach HaRiyah, Keyach HaShmiya, they don't have yet a tziyur, so they're all part of the called Keyach HaRiyah, Keyach HaShmiya. But here something happened, actually. They saw what you usually hear. They saw sounds, and they heard sights. So number one, the keiches are functioning. Something happened there. It didn't just say everything became everything. Like they were so in awe of Matan Torah that they couldn't even see or hear anything. That would be fine. That would be like a gilei of bli gvul. So the gvul of our keiches would be so-called suspended. That's not what happened. So he says, so there's really two sides. He's not really putting it in a form of a question, but it is really a question in a way. L'cheda, two things. Even though he doesn't say it in two things, but when you read on, you see. Number one is that it's not just keiches side by side. It's not just tisachdus v'sarvus. that all the faculties, like Esses, they're actually doing opposite things. So let's talk for a moment. Esses Agnuzis Lifnei Tzimtzum is not causing opposites. Everything there, Koch, Mabina, Das, all the way through Malchus, are just all in a state of Achdus, because they haven't yet come through the Tzimtzum into a structure. But you don't talk about Pulas Hafkis. And the second thing that is important to emphasize, that there is a Pula. Riyah is Riyah, Shmi is Shmi. The only thing is they crossed wires. They could see the sounds and they could hear the sights. Like he says, so we read this already. So I'm just going to go over it quickly now. What we read, and I'll explain through the whole thing. So the next, this whole parenthesis, which ends close to the bottom of the chapter. See where it ends? Yeah. By the words Reinas Anishma before Yesh Leimer. So it's a long thing. Is really an analysis what happened by Matan Torah, and can you use it as a mashal testis for the Because based on what we're saying now, was that a mashal testis for the It's a mashal more for something happening there. The keiches are mischalef in a sense. Like later he'll say, Chlifa Duchtayu. So he says, so it's not just Tisarvus or Rakmash Sheikhlim Yachad. The Einim Nikorim Zemezeh. They're not distinguishable. There's no difference between Riyah and Shmiyah. And there's just Avul Kol Hechad Kameshu B'etzim Husay. The Khan, by Matan Torah, had a Keich Riyah Paul Pula Hafchis, the Keich HaShmiyah. So he's basically wondering, what is the mashal that the Alter Rebbe and Tzemach Tzedek are giving to understand Esesfiras Hagnuzos? Now, if you think about it, it's a very good question. So again, it's not a kasha on what the Maamar says. It's trying to understand it. So the Rebbe Rashab goes now through, I think, 3 different ways to understand this. I'm just putting it into a more of a structural way. He doesn't say Aleph Beis Gimel can move on, but you see from me going back and forth, you see the first thing he says Yesh Leimer, and I'll point out as we go. The first thing is Yesh Leimer, that the truth is the focus here is not on Keiches Havchim. That happens to be an aside, that they saw the sounds and they heard the sound. But what's the reason for it? Is because it's also due to the Pshittus Hatzir Vagbal. Since we're talking about the Keiches Atzmim, or in the Nimshal, that's the Sfiras Hagnuzos, so mitzad that, this Pshittus Hatzir Vagbal, Riyah and Shmi, as we said, are not defined. And B'mela, that's why they had this. That's why they were able to change tafkidim. So in other words, the mashal of the Alter Rebbe here is not to point out that they changed the tafkid. The point out why did they change it? Because when you're a gili from atzmi sakeches, that's what happens. Because at the end of the day, as I said, there is a riyah shmiyah. The only thing is the riyah is seeing sounds and the shmiyah is hearing sights. Okay, so what happened was, so here's how he explains the process. In a regular day, your eyes see your eyes see sights. You see something, a sound you can't see, and you can't hear a sight. That's the regular structure. Matan Torah, there was a gili, naila, that which comes from this place at Pshittus Sir Vagbola, and therefore, there's a capacity now that these keiches don't have this regular Hagbola that you usually see, and that's why Riyah could be like Shmi, and Shmi could be like Riyah. And the Rebbe Rashab distinguishes, says, in the fact that Riyah is Tefus Dover Gashmi, the difference between Riyah and Shmiya and the Shmiya is Tefus Dover Ruchni, that's only the Tzir Behem. That's in the regular structure. But Matan Torah, but Pshittis HaKeiches Basra Hayreinas HaNishma. When there's a pshittus, when there's a level that's a gili coming from more the pshittus hanefesh, then reinas hanishma, meaning that there could be this exchange. So in other words, the focus is not so much on that the pula hafchis, the focus is on why is there a pula hafchis. So that's you can explain it that way. So in other words, when you're talking about the pure riyah and shmiyah, that's talking the keiches. So in other words, Matan Torah was a gili from pshittus, like Esses Viras Gnuzis or and the pu'ula, keiches geluyim, was that they exchanged pu'ulas. That's how the first explanation of the Rebbe Rashab. So it's not a contradiction, in other words, what we learned till now. The Matan Torah had an additional effect. In other words, till now we were just talking about the Hisarvus, that they're all like one. And Matan Torah goes one more. What effect did it have on their keiches geluyim was the Riyah and Shmiyah exchanged functions. Yeah, in this case it's Kipshutik Mashmai, which is going to go back. That's what Pashtus, what means Shemin is Sanira. Yeah. That's the first taich. 1 second. The next interpretation is not going to be Kipshuta Kamashmai. It's going to be much more Ruknisdik. That's what Pashtus what he's saying here. But then he says V'kosha Lemer. But this is a difficulty to say this. Now, what is he going to say now? Why is it difficult to say this? Because he's saying, according to this, the chiluk between Riyah and Shmiya is only in the Keiches Gulim, not the Keiches Atzmim. Because Keiches Atzmim, like we said before, everything's still in a shapeless way. So, but the problem is that the fact is that Riyah and Shmiya are different also in their Shadish, not just in their Gulim. So the answer he's giving doesn't work. Because the problem is now back to the Keiches Atzmim, they're also different. And here we're saying they're not just side by side there, but they also change faculties. So in other words, the shini, the chiluf, what he called the chiluf ha'pu'ulis, pula hafchis, is not just in Keiches Gluim, it's also in the atzmistika level, shein min sanira v'reina sanishma. So we're back to the same issue, that you can't just say there's a difference between pshittis and Gluim. Make sense what I just said, or you need more explanation? Huh? I'll read it inside, and you'll see how it plays out. It says, "V'kosha lemer." Where does he say it? U'makol mokim kosha lemer came. Why? Shani mahus inyan riyah v'shmiya mashem mecholokim be'etzem mahusam hu'sheriyah tefes mahus ve'etzem adover. Okay, so in other words, he's saying we're not just talking about a technicality. It's like I'm just trying to find an example. Let's take a machine, right? A machine. Take a computer or whatever, a machine. Now, the machine, the fact that it does certain functions, that's the way it's structured. But let's say the engineer of the machine is able to go and tamper with the inner wires and changes, therefore, the functionality. That when you press Aleph, you get a Beis, for example, on a computer. You can do that. Right now, an Aleph is an Aleph, a Beis is a Beis. But we all know it's not Be'etzem. It's only because that's how it was structured. But let's say someone goes into the machine or got wet or whatever happened, and someone crossed the wires. I'm just using a muscle, obviously, it's not just pure wires, whatever it is. And when you press Aleph, you get a Beis. That would be like the first way of understanding what happened. Matan Teda went back to the wiring of Seder Shtashel, so to speak. Everything there is Pshittis. So it's able to make, and therefore the result is that an Aleph could be like a Beis, and a Beis like an Aleph, or Shmiya like Riyah, and Riyah like Shmiya. It's almost a technical result of a gili l'mayla hishtalshlus. That just like by Kriyas Yamsuf Taka. Even though Yam and Yabosh have two different shroshim, one is Alma Diskasya and one is Alma Disgalia, but when there's a Kayach Naila, that makes Alma Diskasya behave like Alma Disgalia. That's but the Rebbe Rashab says no. But kosher Makomok and kosher lemekain, because Muchus Inyan Riyah v'Shmiya is not just in their function. It's not just a Aleph and Beis that you press a button. In the Etzem Inyan, what is the difference in Riyah and Shmiya, even in the highest levels, is that Riyah is Tefes Etzem Adover. Let's just use his ACS. Sharimuhus Inyan Riyah Shmiya, Mashmolkim Be'etzem Muhusam, Riyah Tefes Muchus ve'etzem Adover. How does that Nishtalshel and Keiches Gluyim, that you see the actual thing? V'Shmiya Tefes Rak Mitzias Adover. V'zel Masha Keiches Ha'elu Keshaboyim B'Kelim Shalahem. So in other words, he's explaining how it goes from Keiches Atzmim to Keiches Gluyim. That's the reason. It's not a technical thing that when Riyah comes into the body, into the eye rather, you see, and when it comes to the ear, you hear, Keiches Shmiya. It's Be'etzem Husam, they're different. Riyah is a Atzmi. Shmiya is a Giluyim, a Metzias thing. But Mela, when it comes into the Keiches, Keshaboyim B'Kelim Shalahem, Riyah Tefes Dover Gashmi Dafke, V'Shmiya Dover Ruchni. Now, there's always confusion when you read this. It sounds here that Shmiya is superior to Riyah, but that's not what he wants to say. It doesn't mean here Ruchni and Gashmi, as in Ruchni being more Neshamadik and Gashmi being more Chumriyazdik. He means here that Riyah, you see the actual thing. Hearing, you can only hear about it. So it's more, the real word you want to use here really in English would be more ethereal. It's less tfisa. The fact that Riyah b'sharshei relates to the Etzem Hadover, which is Al Pi Halacha, for example, and Eid Nasadayan, because Riyah is Isamtus. When you see something, you saw the thing. It's not subject to change. You could say, I didn't understand what I saw, but I saw it. And once you saw it, you never can go back. That's why an Eid can be a Dayan. You hear it from very persuasive witnesses, Eidim that come and tell you, Eid Riyah, we saw exactly what happened, so and so. Shmiya Sof Kol Sof is not Etzem Hadover. So Shmi, you could hear someone say, and then someone else can come and say, Eidim Zayimim, let's say, and say, no, they weren't there, or they didn't see it right, etc. So in this case, what he's talking Shmi is as weaker than Riyah. Not the Nekuda of Ruchni as in a Hechen Madreg. The reason is because B'Sheidish Enyan, even in the Keiches Atzmim, they're different. So therefore, that's why Kosher came. Okay, Tefes Dover Gadisha Bezel Tfisas Samahus. There we go. Riyah is Tfisas Samahus. Now, interestingly, you could be Tefes the Mahus, but not understand it. You can see something that another person who hears about it understands it better than you. But that's not so Negel in Yonenu here. It's Negel a little later, because when you talk about Mitzias. So basically, I'm going to say this just because it's going to negate the next lines here a little later. So if someone asked you, what's our experience of Ruchnius and Gashmis in this world? Elokus, I should say. The Keich Eliki, Shai Yichud V'Amun says that everything that exists has a Keich Eliki, but we don't, Idlu Nitnu the Shus Layan Lireh says he's going to bring. We don't see it. So we could say that our relationship with the Keich Eliki is B'derech Shmiyah. We only hear about it. We don't see Mamoshes like the Alter Rebbe saw the Dvar Hashem, Keich HaPel B'Nifl in the pillar. What's our relationship with Gashmis? B'derech Riyah. So here you have a perfect example that Riyah and Shmiyah are more than just Keiches. They're actually different ways of experiencing something. And that's true even in the Etzem HaKeiches, Mahus V'Atzmi Shalahem. That continues on. Shezel Fi Mahus Atzmi Shalahem, Sheriyah Tefes Mahus HaDover, Al Kein Tefes Dover Gashmi, Liyah Shebezel Tfisas HaMahus, V'Shmiyah Tefes Dover Ruch, Shuyin HaMetzias. V'Nimtza, this is now, basically he's still saying why the first interpretation he gave is not sufficient. It's not just something that when it comes down into the world of Giluyim, even in the Etzem Mahus, even if you're able to go to the Shedish of Riyah and Shmiyah, where they're not yet Keiches Mitzuyarim, nevertheless, there's a distinction because they experience things completely different. Riyah always relates to Etzem Mahus, and Shmiyah to Mitzias Sadover. So then based on this, what happened by Matan Torah? Before we said what happened by Matan Torah was, there was a flash, a gilim, and B'meila, when it came into the Keiches Gluyim, they changed the functions. It was almost like a teitzah, a technical teitzah from it. Like I mentioned with that, the wiring was changed. But now that Riyah Shmi, even in the Shedish, are different. So what happened by Matan Torah? So now it's a deeper understanding of Shemin and Saniras. He says, "But Matan Torah, Sheireinus Anishma, Hainu Sharia Tofes as a Metzias, V'Shmiyah Tofes Musadava." Something deeper. It didn't just they saw sounds. Like we said, I'll read the parentheses. Is very important in a second. It's not just okay. Let's say I mentioned synesthesia. Synesthesia, I met people that had synesthesia. This is exactly what happens, and it's not an illusion. They hear a sound. Like let's say we hear a song, they see colors. They literally see blue and red. It's like colors start popping up in their minds. And how do they know it's real? Because you ask other people and they see the same colors. They didn't talk to each other. So this has been proven in reality that some people have this thing. Huh?
They listen to music and they see colors?
Yeah. They see colors. Look it up, synesthesia. And there's an artist, Kandinsky. There's people who have it even today.
What do you call it?
Synesthesia, I'm not sure. It's a good question. Take Google. Go incognito if you're afraid of your privacy. And even though probably it's not even work, but okay. And I'm not sure what the translation is. Look it up, synesthesia. I know it's synesthesia for sure in English. But that would only be according to Pirush Aleph of the Ayin Beis. So what's happened? So B'Pel Mamish, since there's a gili from that place, a higher place, so technically speaking, they actually saw, when they heard a sound, the Keil Shefer, they saw something. And when the things they heard, I'm sorry, what did I say? When they saw the sounds and they heard the sights. This is also synesthesia. People look at something and they see a color. They look at something and they hear a sound. Now in Indian, it's not as crazy as it sounds if you think about it. Because what's the thing? If it's two different wires in the brain, why can't Shmi and Riyah overlap? Huh? I don't know if you call it Gilead Atzmi. By then, as I said, it could be a technicality. I don't think it's exactly, again, but now that Rebbe Rashab is saying that that's not the case. We're not talking now the technical, whether they saw sound or not. Much deeper, something by Matan Torah happens much deeper. That which was always ruchnius, that usually you can only in Elam Haza appreciate through Shmiya. You actually saw. They saw the Keyach Eliki. That's what he says. Suddenly, a Shmiya, which was Riyah, which usually only sees the etzem of the thing, but the Mitzias it doesn't relate to, everything changed here. In simple basis, we're going to say about it shortly, he's going to speak. Basically, they saw Elokus, which usually in Elam Hazi you can't see Elokus. It's hidden. Which he's going to say later is the bigger Chiddush. And what is the Riyah? What happened to Riyah? Riyah, which only sees the etzem and doesn't usually relate to Gashmis. The Riyah itself was also was related to Mitzias, not Gashmis, I'm sorry, that's not the right word, because Riyah does see Gashmis. That the Riyah was able to also experience the Muhus HaDover, the Mitzias HaDover. We'll talk about what that means. So this is different than the first pshat. That's why he said V'kosha Lemer. So in the parentheses, he makes it clear. Like he said earlier. He's referring back to the first day from the Yesh Lemer, before the Kosha Lemer. He said, then Kshupshute, what happened by Matan Torah is that they saw the sounds. But that was only the tzir that we spoke earlier, not in the atzmi. Well, the fihanal, meaning now, according to what we're saying now, so it's not just the outer experience of it, that the sights, that the eyes saw the sounds, and the ears heard the sights, but it's also muhus hakeches, that they changed their functionality even in the muhus. So therefore, it's a real hischalfus hakeches, not just in the giluyim. According to what he said at the top, he said this hischalfus hakeches was incidental, so to speak. That the aim thing was a gili atzmi, and b'meila, as I said, with the aleph and beis on the computer. So the aleph became a beis, the beis an aleph. Now we're talking about true hischalfus hakeches, even the sheidish hadvarim. So what do we have from this? In a way, we go back then to the issue of the lecheda, what he said in the first line. So it's more than isarvus and isachdus, because there was a fundamental change in the people there, not just in their keches geluyim, that they actually changed, that their riyah was able to experience what shmiya usually experience, and shmiya, meaning the etzem, what he called the etzem muhus hadover, and shmiya, which, as he's going to say shortly, is the bigger chiddush, that even shmiya, that usually you only sense there's elikuz, but you don't see it. Shmiya that could see and actually experience something as if you see elikuz itself. That's what he comes up now. So now we're back to, I don't say square one, but now, so what exactly? How is this a moshel for Esesfiras Agnuzes? Esesfiras Agnuzes, that's not what happens there. There's no ischalfus hakeches. Esesfiras Agnuzes, everything is like one. So according to the Yesh Lemer in the top, it makes sense. But then Kosha Lemer, the Rebbe Rashab said you can't say that because there's a change in the Atzmi. Since there's a change in the Atzmi, so how does this moshel fit here? That's really where we're left right now. Follow so far? Okay, good. Now, now that you're telling me that it's not just you see sounds, but Riyah is now teifus what shmiya. What's the yisr? What's the mila? Shmiya, the mila is absolutely that usually you could only hear about elikus, and now they saw elikus by Matan Torah. But what's the yisr that the Riyah is like shmiya? It's actually a yirida l'chayr. So now the Rebbe Rashab goes and explains yet another pirush in all of this. So he says, "Hine b'mokam achem avur in yirenes hanishma the b'chinas haruchnis hamahavas hayesh v'atzleina berichuk hainrag b'chinas shmiya v'asogim merachel hey eslam b'chinas riyah mekarev." I should correct myself. He's not explaining a new thing. He's explaining what he meant before. So he says elsewhere, this whole inyan is explained. I already said it. The truth is when I said earlier, but basically, what's the nekuda here? That by Matan Torah the chiddush was that usually Reines Anishma means the Reines Anishma the Bechinas HaRuchnis HaMahavas HaYeshu Atzleina Berichuk, which means Ruchnis, which is usually Berichuk, which means only in a form of Shmiya, by Matan Torah, which is only Hasoga V'Rochik, that was now in a form of Riyah Mekarev. Umamela Shemin Asanira. V'hainu hayesh hagashmi ha'etzlam b'chin shmiya merachik ki kishenigla aruchnis is batla hayesh. So in other words, what happened here is usually, let's just go back. You learned the Maamar or the Sichas Hazino Shemayim v'Sishma Oretz. That usually Shemayim is b'richuk and Oretz is b'kiruv. By Matan, that's why it says by Yeshaya the opposites. So the point is, Ruchnis by us is usually b'derech richuk. Like the famous word of the Baditchever, that a kunz, he talks about the Eibishter, he says a kunz. You're writing this for him about Elam Haba, and you give us in Mamoshes, you give us Elam Haza. Try the other way around. Write about Elam Haza, and it's Nishanis in a Sefer, and give us an experience, a taste of Elam Haba. And you'll see how the Jews will behave. In other words, by us, what's Mamoshes? Alikus b'pshittis. I'm sorry, Elam is b'pshittis. Alikus b'schachos. It's completely the way. What do we relate to b'chinas riyah? As much as you be a Chassidus Eid, and as much as you learn Chassidus and know about Elikus, at the end of the day, you wake up in the morning, you feel your body. You don't feel your soul. And when you're hungry, you no one needs to tell you to eat. Ruchnius takes work. Because the Eibishter made it in a way, he turned everything around. Then instead of Ruchnius being b'pshittis and Gashmis b'ischachos, or Elikus b'pshittis and Elam is b'ischachos, he made it that Elam is b'pshittis and Elikus is b'ischachos. In the language of Shmiya Riyah, he made Ruchnius is b'derech Shmiya. You hear about it, like a story. And Gashmis is b'derech Riyah. By Matan Torah, this turned around. Gashmis, Ruchnius became like Riyah, as if turning it inside out. The truth was Nizgala, that Elikus is the Iker, is the Poshet, Pshitas, and Elam is the B'ischachos. So what happened? That's what happened. So Shem and Esanira, that's what he says. Shem and Esanira, Hainu Hayesh Gashmi, which usually, now the Yesh became Berachik. So the Shmiya now relates to the Yesh. Until now, the Shmiya related to in regular times, the Shmiya relates to the Ruchni. Now it's the other way around. If you're able to see, like he says, V'hainu, shero muhus ayin elikia mahava shuzeu amitis adover. V'agashmi hayesam rak b'china shmiyas hametzias. Shari be'emes enem metzias amiti kaneda. So once in history, we had the situation where the Eibishter revealed the truth. Like Beloshin is does he bring the Tanya? So according to this, if you see now a third interpretation, it's not as chalfas hakeches. It's not that Riyah is suddenly seeing sights. It's actually the emes. It's what happened by Matan Torah was the Gilui HaEmes. The Gilui HaAtzmi revealed the truth. Till now, we were talking about faculties. So if you talk about keches, like in the first interpretation, so the first explanation he gave was that the Atzmi was Nizgal, and the keches was a technical matter that the Shmiya became like Riyah and the Riyah Shmiya. Then he said, you can't say that because also Etzem Muhusa keches, Riyah and Shmiya are fundamentally different. But now he's being metavich at all. Because he's saying that, I should say, he's explaining the Eifin Beis, not the Eifin Aleph. So it's not as chalfas hakeches. Why? Because what happened was by Matan Torah was the Metzias, the real truth was revealed. Because the whole difference in Shmiya is not just what you see and what you hear, it's how you relate to Elam. Do you see Elam as a reality and Elikus as a Shmiya? Or the opposite? And by Matan Torah it was the opposite. It's not as chalfas hakeches. Well, the Cheda, there's the Elkinim, Mashakosa B'Sefer Shalbein Chelik Beis, Ilmole Nitn Rishus La'ayin Liris came. So what happened by Matan Torah was Taka Ayin Liris. Not Ilmole Nitn Rishus, Taka Rishus was given, and the Eibishter showed the people by Matan Torah exactly what the Metzias is. That the true Metzias of Welt is Elikus, the Yesh is B'derech Richuk is only a Heisofa, so B'meil Hashem Nesanira and Re'en Nesanishma. But it's still not over yet. Still not over. Anyway, let me just read the that they actually saw the Ayin Liyesh by Matan Torah. So, but then here's the next problem. If this is the case, now that we're talking that this Chiddush is Matan Torah, so then who kamoy b'haneshama be'etzem b'keich hariyah shmir shebo kedim islapshusa b'guf ve'en kan gam hisarvus hakeches. According to this is going to be the Taich of Matan Torah, this doesn't help us. regarding the Moshel of Esses Sfiris Agnuzis. This is like a whole other thing. You're saying by Matan Torah was Gilead Lakus to the point that what was before B'chinas Shmiya, Gashmis became Riyah, and Gashmis say Yesh is now in a form of Shmiya. So then what we're talking about is how things are Be'etzem HaNeshama, as before it comes B'Islam Shusa B'Guf, Ein Kan Gam Misarvus HaKeiches. I'm wondering whether they're saying 2 points here or 1 point. I'm trying to remember. Ein Kan Gam Misarvus HaKeiches is very good, because this is completely, so then the whole Matan Torah, if you're going according to this taich, in Reinas HaNishma, the whole thing is not related to this Maamar altogether. That's why the Alter Rebbe brings this. In other words, it's a good pshat, but it's a different pshat. It's not talking about Gili Keiches Atzmim, where everything is residing side by side. That's not the Vort. We're not talking about Keiches now. We're talking about the way you understand Gashmis and Ruchnis. That's the, so he says, in the Mashal, Kedim Islam Shusa Beguf. So in other words, we're not talking about Keiches HaNefesh here altogether. You're talking about how it's all in the Etzem HaNeshama, the Etzem B'Keich HaRiyah. Ve'en kan gam Sarvus HaKeiches. So that which you said earlier, Sarvus HaKeiches, is not there. Now, so based on this, the Moshel doesn't, based on this beard answers another question, the question we spoke about before.
Yeah.
Huh?
But the gain by shape Nesidira.
Yeah, but it doesn't help us in understanding the Moshel for the Inyan. So we're still back to that. So then the Rebbe Rashab then counters by saying, Omnam yesh leimer, shlafia nala pirish de reinas hanishma hu sheis chazushus ibekei hashmiya. There's no real chidush in Keich HaRiyah. What happened with Riyah? Shmiya, it's clear. Now, what was before seen b'dichuk, Shmiya, now the Shmiya is able to experience it like an Eifin Riyah. That which was before only b'derech Shmiya is now in a form of hasagas hamahus, elikus. So he's adding. So the chiddush is not just that it's like Riyah, but they actually have both miles. The mile of Riyah that it's mamoshes, they actually see elikus in a eifim like mahus hadover, but they also have the hasaga. So you also have the mile of Shmiya.
Sagas Hamahus is a mile of Riyah, no?
No, not hasagas. No, it's like this. Shmiya is hasagas hamitzias, but dachlal. And Riyah is Riyah samahus. I think that's the lashon.
Sagas Hamahus is the mile of both.
Yeah. I think that's almost short. Let me just see that.
Yeah, Sagas Hamahus by Riyah, by Shmiya. How can I Sagas Hamahus by Shmiya? You hear about something?
That's only by Matan Torah that happened. By Matan Torah,
so why
the Shmiya.
Can I have Sagas Hamahus when I see something? Why can't I have Sagas Hamahus?
When you see something, because Riyah is not hasaga. Riyah is samtus, not hasaga. Hasaga is something that's on your term. The mile of hasaga is also it's chsar.
It's like I see something, I don't understand how it works, but it is.
So let me just finish it because let me just finish the point here. So based on this, the chiddush is primarily in Shmiya. When we asked before the question, what's the inyan of what does Riyah get from this? What happened by Matan Torah with Riyah? Riyah, you have one saying, why can't you just say that Riyah is that Riyah had also both miles? That usually what you see Ruchni is, but you don't relate to it. You see the Muhus.
This is in Perish's initial.
So now the Rebbe Rashab concludes like this: with Tzarech Leimer, the Matan Torah Hegilim, the Bechinas Asma saying, so Shalamayla messes for the segments. You see the word? It's taken not the Moshel Festus for the segments. Based on these abiurim, so only the first beard would be a Moshel, the first Yesh Leimer. But the Rebbe Rashab ultimately finds ways to say that there's something else. It's not a stira, because you could have different pirushim in Reinas HaNishma. That's not a problem. But he's saying ultimately, you have to say Matan Torah was a gili higher than a Sesferis. So he's going back and saying that B'Poel, to explain all this, the only thing you could say is that it's not a Sesferis Agnuzis, it's higher. And that's why they could, Ruchni and Gashmi were able to be that changed. And lower levels, the Shinui is in the Keiches and the Tziyur, as he explained. That's in the Kudas Adover. This is the parenthesis. Now, if you look after the parentheses, you'll see that also relates to the parentheses. It says Yesh Leimer. If you skip the parentheses now, go back to the lashon of the Alter Rebbe. Before the Rebbe Rashab went in the Hills Arichas, Yesh Leimer the Bechin Siriyah Shmir the Neshama Kedim Eslapshus Beguf Shu Bechin Siriyah Samahus V'Asogas Samahus Kuma Asogas Neshamos Beganei and Hin Nizeo by Erdish Talshus. Ayin Ba'ora Lekis that comes be Slapshus. I'm skipping out the parentheses. Avol etzema eir b'derech kol b'eresh shelamayla mislapshus b'elms hoyi bechinis yediyas hametzias. That's regular. Okay? The inyan rein is hanishme huriyas muchus etzem hadover. V'shem l'sanidish hasogi bechinis hasogas hamahus, not just hasogas hametzias. The inyan heisarvus v'shekol keich ina mugde b'muhusei davke v'yikin achlifu duchtayush and zbar leil shezem sapshitis mekenim. So what do we conclude from that? That there's actually two things happening here, depending how you teach Nein and Sanishma. If you go with Alter Rebbe's mashal, then the pshat is there was a Gili Keich Atzmi, and that the Riyah, and that by Matan Torah they were able to see the Etzem Mahus, Hasogas HaMahus. And that's why there was a chiluf of the Keiches. If you're talking about the beer, the second and third beer that he gave, or if you say it's second and third, or at least it's two parts of the second, then we're talking about a gili that's higher than Esesfir Sagnuzis, and therefore not really a mashal for this inyan. So basically it is a mashal, and it's taka correct that it's higher than Isachtas V'Sarvas because there was a chlifu. The regular, what we learned earlier was only Isarvas V'Sachtas. We didn't learn that was deeper than that. So the maskana at the end is that there is something here that's deeper than just all the keiches being residing side by side in the etzim, the keiches atzmim in the Esesfir Sagnuzis, and then there's another beer that's even higher than that. Basically, end of the day, Matan Torah is higher than in two ways. It's higher than Hisarvus, and it's even higher than Esesfir Sagnuzis. That's what Pashtus, what he's saying once the conclusion is like this. So I'm not surprised that I remember when I learned it the first time, I had to learn it many times. It's very complicated because until you don't break it down, all these angles. Even here, I hope I did a justice to this. And if not, we could always talk about it some more. Anyway, we didn't get further, but at least we have some type of picture of Esesfir Sagnuzis. You see, it's not pushed. Okay.
Now, one side is based on the fact, based on what we hear on the first beer that he said or the end.
Sounds to me